Hey everybody, and welcome to History Havoc. This is Eric Bynum. Just want to come on and apologize really quickly for the sound. You won't see me in the street a lot because of the construction that was going on, or the traffic was really bad, so I'm going to do some voiceover. But first, let's head to the first clip here as I take you on a little trip around the historical sites of Temple, Texas. Alright, so I'm in downtown Temple, Texas today. I wanted to bring you some of the history of my hometown here. I'm going to start off with this mural because it kind of gives a little bit of background of the city itself. First of all, over here we have the Temple Wildcats, our local high school football team. This is Central Texas. You know, we got Friday Night Lights. Football here is a big deal. They're taking on the arch enemy of the next town over, Belton Tigers. Right here in the middle, you have the cattle drives. The Chisholm Trail ran right through here. This is a big part of the area. But then I want to move the camera here a little bit more because what really helped start this town was the railroads. We're going to see some of the important railroad buildings that were built here by Santa Fe. And I'm going to take you through some of the more important historical buildings of the city and kind of, bring up some of that lost and forgotten history by the locals. Every day a lot of people walk by or drive by some really historic buildings. And a lot of times that's forgotten in our public history. We're too focused on state or national or whatever else. But right here locally in Central Texas, in Temple, Texas, there's a lot of great history. And that's what I want to bring you. What I want to talk about here in Temple is the First United Methodist Church. It moved to its current location in 1891, but had to be rebuilt after a 1911 fire. And that's where we get the current sanctuary in this Romanesque revival style building. It's a beautiful building completed in 1914 with Art Deco motifs throughout and some beautiful stained glass windows that were added in the mid-1960s. Right here, this is the Kyle Hotel, opened in 1929. This 13-story structure has quite the history here in downtown Temple. Lawrence Welk and his five-piece band played in the top-story ballroom in 1932. And some of the most famous guests to stay here include Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, and even Scott and White patients needing special care. During World War II, the roof garden was where soldiers slept on cots. And however, the hotel closed in 1974. It did reopen in 1991 as apartments for the low income, the elderly, the handicapped, the disabled, as low-cost apartments. And there are 64 apartments in the Kyle building, or the Kyle Hotel, as it still stands. Perhaps my favorite building in all of Temple is the Ferguson house here. This was the home to James E. and Miriam Ferguson, two very colorful characters in Texas history who both would go on to become governor. The house was built in 1907, and at the time it was considered a mansion. They occupied the house until Jim became governor in 1915 and returned after he was impeached. Yes, impeached in 1917. Even though Jim's governorship was short, he did help bring some progress to the state of Texas, including helping create the Texas Highway Department. He helped improve public school funding, but scandal would wreck his career. He tried to make a comeback in 1924, but couldn't get on the ballot, so his wife Miriam, or Ma Ferguson, ran. She ran on an anti-Ku Klux Klan platform that actually provoked some retaliation as Klan members rode up and down 7th Street here in Temple, where the house is located, in full gallop on horses, throwing bricks through the windows. So these were two very colorful characters in Texas history that lived right here in Temple until 1932 when they left the house. But they also tried to cultivate these kind of down home images. And one of the reasons why I'm only showing photos here, and you're going to see this throughout some of the homes, is this is still somebody's home. It is a Texas historic landmark, but people still live here. And I didn't want to invade anybody's privacy or property or anything like that. So I took some photos, and now I'm doing a little voiceover to talk about these homes as not to invade anybody's privacy. This is Vandever Elementary School, which is the oldest elementary school in Temple. The first building that was built on this location was built in 1891. It was just a simple structure. At the time, it was known as Temple Ward School. In 1896, a 6-room stone structure was built. In 1904, they changed the name of the school to Vandever in honor of Bell County educator Mrs. M.V. Vandever. That stone structure was torn down in 1928 due to structural issues and replaced with the present building as it stands today. The old school had been vacant for years and was facing demolition. And then Temple ISD actually sold the Vanderbilt School building to a woman. And it appears from the outside that they have turned it into an apartment-like structure. But I can remember this being one of the many elementary schools when I was growing up here in Temple. This here has been dubbed the Chinese Mansion and is kind of seen as the jewel of the historic district in Temple. It's a 4-story, 18,000 square foot house that was built between 1914 and 1916 for a local ear, eye, and nose and throat physician. The architect was associated with Frank Lloyd Wright early in his career, and the house cost about $35,000 to build at the time, which was be around $1.38 million in today's money. It is a 4-story, 40-room residence. Again, it is still someone's actual home. Thus, I'm not filming out in front or anything like that. But it is a beautiful, beautiful home here in the historic district of Temple. And when you look at this historic district, all of these homes that I'm showing you are, relatively within just a few blocks of one another. With the exception of maybe being the Ferguson house, which is probably about 4 blocks away from the rest of them. But most of them are in this same little corridor area of the historic district in Temple, Texas. The next house I want to showcase here is known as the Longmire house. Old Temple residents referred to this as Mrs. Longmire's house. It is a beautiful home that was built in 1932 for Dr. Arthur Carroll Scott, a prominent physician in Temple. He was the son of Dr. A.C. Scott Sr., one of the founders of Scott and White Hospital. And if you're not familiar with the area, Scott and White Hospital, now Baylor Scott and White, is one of the most prestigious and widely facilitated hospital systems in Texas that started here in Temple and it stretches all throughout the central and north Texas. Has grown quite a bit, but Scott and White itself has been a force in the economics and the of the entire area, not just Temple, but all of Central Texas, because of how big it has grown. So this was kind of designed in a non-traditional way. Dr. Scott, the story is that he kind of drew the plans up himself and personally supervised the construction of the home and kind of made it to his own character before he sold the home in 1936 and moved into another mansion not far away. As we continue our tour around Temple, that brings us to what is the oldest congregation in the city. This here started off as the First Presbyterian Church and is now the Redeemer Presbyterian Church. But this started in the fall of 1881. The Santa Fe Railroad offered free lots to any church that was willing to come and erect a building and start a congregation. And a few Presbyterian families organized the church in the fall of 1881. That allowed them to become the first congregation. The original church was located a few blocks away from from this current one. The current building was built in 1929, and then has since been added on to in the following years, in the 80s and in the early 2000s. But this is so important, especially when you look at how big the church is in these communities in Central Texas. Whether it's the Baptist church or the Methodist church or the Presbyterian church, they played such a huge role. And this being the first one in this town has huge significance because of the history that has been here for well over 100 years now.
So behind me is probably the most important building in the history of Temple, Texas. This is the Santa Fe Depot. The Gulf, Colorado and Santa Fe Railroad established this depot in essentially Temple, Texas in June 1881. The city was later incorporated in 1882, but this is really what brought everybody to the area.
So again, the wind in the fountain was just a little bit too much, so I'm going to do a little voiceover here, but this really is an important part of the city of Temple. This is kind of what founded the city and allowed it to grow, was the Santa Fe Railroad. It's still a very important part of the infrastructure and the economics of the city and the entire area as well. For 78 years, this depot was used for train travel. Then it shut down in 1989 and was abandoned for about 6 years before the city bought it. They bought the depot and the surrounding of almost 9 acres, where they built city buildings. They revamped the depot. They created the Railroad and Heritage Museum. They created meeting spaces and things like that inside the depot. And so it has been revitalized. It has been brought back, and now it is a functioning Amtrak and train depot once again. But this is just part of the history of a city that gets overlooked so much. Many of the citizens that live here in Temple are not aware of the history that surrounds them, and much of it fascinating, whether it's the old buildings or the religious aspects of things, or the railroad and how the city really began. Too much of public history is often overlooked by those that are around it, and we need to kind of remind people to stop and take a look around of what's in their own hometown and what's there to be seen and to be learned about. This is just a snippet of the entire Central Texas area and what all this encompasses, from neighboring little towns and Carnegie libraries that are built, and different things like that have been here for generations, that we need to celebrate and remember. And hopefully this will allow you a glimpse inside my hometown, but also to get you to stop and think about, okay, well, what is the history in your hometown? And I think that's one thing that we tend to forget about too often, with progress and, the advancements and the booming of the towns and this and that. A lot of times we forget about, how it all started, where it all began, and some of the more historical sites within our city. Thankfully, the city of Temple has preserved a lot of these buildings, and, even the state of Texas has marked some of them as historic sites and things like that to preserve our history. And, looking at the depot itself, it had been abandoned for 6 years. When I remember growing up, seeing it just sitting there abandoned, and nothing, I didn't really realize how important that whole thing was. So again, I want to thank you for coming along with this little journey around my hometown of Temple, Texas, to kind of take a look at some of the historical aspects that are still here and still thrive here in this wonderful city that I call home. And I want to thank you, and hope everybody has a wonderful day. Appreciate it.